move on to, as we begin the second day, we move on to the first panel discussion today, which is moving forward, embracing challenges and opportunities to strengthen higher education in the new normal. And I would like to call upon our esteemed panelists for the same. Dr. Runa Maitra, who is the founder and director, People Talent International, who is the moderator of the very first session today. Please, if you could clap, and yes, thank you. Joutishman Dutta, Managing Trustee, Assam, Downtown University, Assam, India. Dr. Suyash Bhatt, Acting Manager, Center for Academic and Accredited Programs, Senior Lecturer, Emirates Institute of Finance, Dubai. Dr. Rommel Sergio, Associate Dean, Canadian University of Dubai. A very warm welcome to all our esteemed panelists. And I would like to hand over the stage to Dr. Runa Maitra, who is the moderator of the very first session today.
Very good morning. Thank you for joining us. It's very important that always we should cherish what we have and not forget what we don't have. So, let's enjoy this conversation with our esteemed panelists. And the topic is very pertinent. We all have been looking into the post-pandemic era. So when the pandemic happened, I'm sure all of us are absolutely awestruck, but not really, I think in art, the shack, or looking around. I think I will not go to that era at all right now. Rather, we will spend some time together what we learned from that. Many times we take things for granted, but the best part which probably happened during that process from 2020 to now, a lot of digitalizations have happened. I think that's where probably we'll dwell some time, and we should all thank all these entrepreneurs who have put their booth outside, because they are all enablers, and they have ensured that, we turn around the situation. And probably that's why we are spending some time on this topic, that how are we moving forward? 2023 already. It's quite a great year. Right from January, we started looking into this year with a lot of hope, with new energy. We're also looking around for new opportunities. And also the stalwarts who are sitting with us as panelists, they have come forward to share their best practices in their new normal. So what we are going to do, I'm going to request each one of them to share their experience, and as I mentioned, we'll spend more time on the challenges and opportunities and how we are embracing new normal. So I think that's where a lot of learning would happen. We are not worried about how much audience we have, because we know we are getting recorded. All right. So all the digital platforms will ensure all the learnings happening in this room will be shared with the world. And I'm myself a social influencer. I'll make sure that happens. Okay. So with much further ado, I'm going to request our panelists to begin with Joutishman, right? So let's start from him and let's hear what are your thoughts on the topic. So we'll spend 5 minutes on the topic, so that we all are dwelling on it, and then we'll get on to some conversation, yeah? So to begin with you, thank you.
Very good morning to everyone. The topic is very pertinent. I think the digital age had come in almost every sector of every industry except education, with the level it should have come in. COVID just was kind of the catalyst that brought it forward much faster. We had all the tools. During COVID, when we adopted, say, Zoom classes or Google Class, or we used a lot of blended learning, no technology was developed during COVID. More or less, all technology was already existing. It was just not adopted. So the fact is, there was some kind of a lethargy, or I don't know, some issue because of it. Education was not adopted this new digital or blended learning. COVID was very, very useful. It kind of shook up the entire education system across the world and made people realize what was existing and what can be used. So how does it help? If I can give a gist, is that it is a great level playing field. Today we have, say, in some areas of the world, the best universities, because maybe they had been established long ago, they had the best industry clusters, they had the best industry-academy interface, but then universities have to come up in practically every corner of the world. Only then there is, students will be able to reach. It should not be out of reach from any specific area in the world. When you have digital learning available, this level playing field comes in, which is of a huge benefit. So it doesn't matter you're in some corner in Africa or some far off corner in India. If you have access to digital learning, I think a lot of learning can happen, and that brings a lot of equity among students across the world. So these are the basic things I would like to start with, where I see the benefit of digital learning.
Thank you. What a great start. In fact, we all are now part and parcel of all the process. We are talking about learning management system to learning experience. So I will probably dwell on that little later. Before that, we'd like to hear from you.
Thank you very much. Again, my name is Rommel, Sergio. This is my 15th year in the UAE, and perhaps the way we can tackle the issue is not just within the UAE soil, but to expand more of our discussion points within the boundaries of our respective universities to where we have been. And yeah, it's so difficult to bring into that moment of generalizing things because you and me, we may have experienced different toils, different exposure to the challenges, but then we may have some similarities, like one had been mentioned already, so that equity in terms of providing services, academic services, for example, education per se, across different nationalities. For instance, Canadian University Dubai being a QS World Rank University, part of the top 2% university in the world, we want to make sure that the diversification of our students, our services cater to that fitness, from which you can see how the range of different learning curves would happen. So it may not be totally different. What I'm saying is may not definitely be distinct across because we have that kind of exposure. But for those who happen to be in their home countries, like in the Southeast Asian countries, where you can see more of non-diversified figures when it comes to demographics, definitely you may have a different stance, because in the QS World Rank University, we want to make sure that even the students are involved in that effort to bring in research, even community engagement, other than teaching them, providing them with a quality teaching that we owe them to have. So it's essentially like a various cascading thoughts on how we've learned during the pandemic, and that's definitely one of the things, the challenges that had been beset was to have that kind of openness in terms of agile management, because I teach organizational development and change and happen to also be a consultant across industries. And that's something definitely beneficial for many of us who happen to be not just educators or academicians, but we want to make sure that the trends in industry are studied, because the partnerships that we have across industries, that matters a lot in terms of bringing in a customized, more focused, and I would say more pragmatic set of approaches within our classrooms. That defines the distinctiveness of the higher education institution that we owe our stakeholders to have. But other than agile change management, capacity building, the leadership has been challenged throughout time. I think it's so important to be more realistic, pragmatic, and as I've mentioned, to be open, nimble and flexible on things, because that's the call of the time. And the third thing I would want to say is more on, I mentioned at an earlier part, on the equity part. And you may argue on so many and debate on so many aspects of that, such as the digital part of that equity, or social equity, which is, I would suppose, even more important as to track how well our students learn and the opportunities provided to them, especially for most challenged students. There are not just disadvantaged students, but special needs students. Myself being a person who's teaching psychology and at the same time into organizational psychology and community work, I believe that that social equity is very important, because the belongingness the students would feel and the approaches we're trying to identify, even now that it's transitioning. Some, you may say, in your home country, there's still a trace of the hybrid type of exposure to learning. And of course, here in the UAE, it's a different case, especially if you're under the Ministry of Education, wherein we're back technically, physically, with the on-site type of engagement. So the traditional aspect of doing the classes happened to have resumed a year back or more or so. So those are the three key points I would want to say. I'm sure we will have very good discussion later on. Thank you so much.
Extremely important points you have highlighted, and all the 3 points are very valid. I have loads of questions around that. Before that, I'll go to Dr. Suyash for your thoughts.
Good morning and salam alaikum. I represent an institution which represents both the industry as well as academics. So we are an institute which is set up by Central Bank, and we primarily train bankers. And during the pandemic, in 1 year, we trained almost 29,000 bankers. And we also have an academic division spread in 3 campuses. So for us, when COVID happened, moving from physical sessions to digital format was a massive, disruption. And there are multiple challenges that we faced. Not only, I'm sure everyone would have faced. The first was, I think, cultural aspect as well, that as an academician or as a trainer, how are you measured when you say that you deliver training programs? So when we liaison with banks learning division, they used to have a format that how many hours of training did you attend, and basically that's how their performance was mapped, and the learning outcomes or KPIs were mapped. Similarly, for academics, we had a teacher would get a feedback only when you can see your participants. Whereas in a digital format, when we talk about cultural aspect, you can't enforce people to turn on their camera. So that was a major challenge. And how do you know that there is engagement? So that was a second challenge. So we had to, as learning and development and a division head for academics, we had to actually go back and rework our entire strategy on not just using a platform, but how do you make it engaging? Because you can have anyone joining your session and then going for making a coffee. How do you ensure that they understood what the session was exactly meant for? So we brought in a lot of innovative things like micro learning, where at the end of each session we used to have a small game-based assessment. So you can use so many platforms are there, like Kahoot, and so many other platforms were there. So we gamified the entire experience. And also for bankers, so when we talk about bankers, managing this large volume of training programs, we have almost 1,000 training programs running from AI to AML to credit risk to leadership. So having all of this in an online format is you really also have to reinvent the way you deliver it. So we had to also take sessions for our trainers. So because you have to sensitize them with how are you going to adopt this new normal. So we worked on 3-pronged strategy. The first was the technology stack. So we put in place a proper Moodle-enabled system through which you could map the competency of each program that has been delivered, or the course that has been delivered, or a training that is delivered. We also introduced micro-learnings. So micro-learnings are basically for both students who are in academics as well as for bankers, where we launched a platform called Insight, where we had more than 800 training programs with a time period of 4 hours. It's a self-paced learning where there is a learning outcomes are mapped to the assessments that are planned, and the entire certification was also then accredited by Chartered Bankers Institute, UK. So self-paced learning and making a platform, and then the third part was people management. So we trained our trainers. One question which my boss, who was basically head of all the 3 campuses and the entire training division, Mr. Jamal, he used to always ask me, when I see people, I know they are working. Now I can't see them, and they are all at home. So how do I know they are working? So we also had, developed matrix at the back end, where Every week, the HR would have an interaction also where this, I think it is his domain expertise, but I can talk a little bit because we did something in this domain. There were challenges related to mental health as well, because everyone is at home, so you don't see each other. So how are you going to deal with that? So we used to bring these trainers together, academicians together, and share, what is their experience, what have they done. So apart from, just logging in the morning and logging off at the time that maybe 3 o'clock or whatever was the time, it's also engagement that we brought in. So it was a very challenging, but at the same time, I can say when we came out of it, we are left with much richer experience, and it was an opportunity for us because we, at the end of this entire process, we launched our own platform where we are now. It's an independent self-paced learning platform which we have launched for bankers. We have our own system for student management which we have developed, and the entire ecosystem of assessment is also made automated using AI and other things where you don't need a teacher in the classroom to see whether you're writing or not. The camera captures your movement. If you have a mobile phone, it tells that there's some kind of malpractice which is happening. So a lot of these things helped us, and for us, student engagement really went up also from a banking perspective. We got a very good feedback from banks. So now when we went to face-to-face format, banks are very happy that the entire new model that we have, the engagement-based model. The participants even want now more online than offline. So they are now so used to online that they don't want to come back to the campus. So yeah, that's my take on it.
Lot of learning from you. In fact, a lot of best practices you have shared. Thank you for sharing that. But I'll still go back to the basic with all of you. In spite of Dr. Suyash highlighting, how you had come up with new ideas, new thoughts, new platforms, new methods. Rather, to look into the journey, it's very important to also understand these challenges you might have faced and how did you overcome. I think there's a great learning over there. In that thought process, I would like to request you to highlight 3 segments in terms of you have students. A lot, both of you have spoken about that students have undergone a change. Putting them in a physical classroom is one method, but bringing them on to, as you said, log in and log out format. So what exactly happened when they were told that now you'll be studying online? That is one challenge. Secondly, professors and all eminent, learned, teachers who are actually, as you talked about engagement, Dr. Suyash, and you also gave some ideas around the equity that, how do you really manage the whole ground to engage them? Because most of them don't come on videos. They are only using them as an audio platform. So what was the method you all have applied, if you can pinpoint, to create the equation between the teacher and the students? We would love to learn that.
See, initially, I'll just go through our experience. What with initially, because the pandemic hit out of the blue, that is when we adopted it. There were always online classes going on, but it was never so-called part of the syllabus. There were guest lectures or a few classes here and there. But it became a systematic format only due to the pandemic that all your classes had to be shifted online. Initially, students took it very well. The faculties also took it very well because honestly, everyone thought it is just temporary for a few weeks. So no one thought it's going to drag on so much. There's kind of a monotony that sets in when you kind of do online classes. The biggest deal is to make it very interesting, and how to take a class in the classroom. The interactions are very different from when you do it digitally. So, and then keep students engaged is very different. Secondly is that there's a way of doing a digital, say it's not just about taking classes. You also have to give digital learning tools to support them. Initially, an LMS perhaps was something that more or less a lot of universities adopted or had semi-adopted when the pandemic started. But the LMSs, even then, I would personally say that we were using some of the best ones, were not that equipped to handle the students full-time basis, because LMSs were also a learning support It became like the only medium of learning. So that is, I think, they were not as good at that point of time. So converting your notes, your classes to be digital format, giving supporting learning tools is something I think we are much better, but these were the biggest challenges that I think we faced, and I think most universities or teaching organizations faced initially. Over the last 2-3 years, obviously a lot of improvisation has happened, but digital learning can be a good supporting tool, but for many students who have signed up for a physical classes, they will not accept it as the only learning tool. So I would personally pitch in for a blended model which works greatly. Yes, obviously there are some digital programs only where the students have signed up for it. I don't think there's any issue there. To keep them engaged, to keep the students and the faculty engaged and in the class, it gets a little tough. That is going to be a little challenging going forward also.
Very, very important point you mentioned, the attention span, when you have online, that is definitely, especially youth. They have a lot of energy which they want to channelize, and making them sit hours and hours, and that also sometimes full day for to attend all the classes. I'm sure there had been a lot of challenge, as you mentioned, but you did also mention about some tools, and both of you in your earlier thought sharing mentioned about few things. But if you can also kind of share some best practice, it will be very important for us and audience to learn. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think in context, the question goes like, what challenges we were able to encounter during the time we were online and by the time we transitioned to the physical classes. I think it's so important to emphasize the fact that, the technology use is already a problem. And even if you happen to be in the UAE at the time, I still remember even my son cannot buy a specific gadget for school, and so was those students in the university, because it's the availability of those gadgets that happen to come into play. We may not really have that much problem when it comes to access to internet because the country has that very good infrastructure, but I guess it's more on the transitioning strategy. We were all caught unaware about the pandemic. No one has been prepared for this. And the thing that definitely happened in my mind, one of the things that we have seen in there is that it tested our resilience. How we bounce forward, not just to move forward, but to bounce forward in terms of recounting those things that once it happens, we're quite ready compared to the time we were not in 2020. Another thing is that scope of support we're providing for our students, for our stakeholders, primarily for our teachers. So imagine many of us, we have that 1 or 2 days before the physical shutdown in the schools and the universities that transpired. And in a day or two, we found ourselves attending whichever technical training programs we need to undertake. We're not an exemption to the rules. Students, we have done that. Faculty members, we have done that too. So the challenges in terms of the transfer of knowledge, in terms of that technical aspect, happen to come into play. But what is more revealing is that in the process of doing that, a very good analysis also from one of our panel members here is on that aspect of looking into our well-being. So I think one of the best practices we've been doing is that we do have a counseling psychological office that provides psychosocial services for our faculty and for our staff and for our students. So once we've seen this international study, even from Harvard University, saying 1 out of 5 students basically had an online dropout due to the height of the pandemic. And now we're in that process of re-engineering what damages had been caused by providing some strategies on how we can retrieve those students back, and at the same time, how can we make our branding even stronger. So for many universities that happen to be QS World Rank, I'm going that far because we have more sophisticated way of capturing our audience, how to even maintain or retain good relationships across stakeholders. And I guess that's even more powerful to reflect on, because the third part I would want to say is our challenges became our opportunities, because that opened a lot of doors to state that, okay, we have all of these challenges now, so what will we do? So there are more subsequent, more firm and staunch programs that we have prepared for ourselves, for our stakeholders. And I think that opens gates of opportunities. Yeah, thank you.
Very valid point, Dr. Suyash. Rather, I will, because reflecting on what you shared initially, so the platforms you have created, the learning tools you have created, that kind of training program, I was amazed you talked about 1,000 training programs and plenty of such opportunities for the people. Whereas, we are also talking about, Joutishman talked about the engagement, and Rommel sir is talking about transition. I would like to request you to reflect upon how did you handle the other set of stakeholders who were probably not that digital savvy, but they had opportunity to learn from your platform.
Sure. Yeah, so that was not only digital savvy. I think that we also had a mindset challenge. So I'll just give you an example. So we have 3 campuses in Sharjah, Dubai, and Abu Dhabi. I think if you put all of them together, it's almost 50,000 square feet of real estate, and it's all idle. And now, if these and we were the only training institute for since it's a government-owned, all the bankers have to go through the training programs that we have. So imagine it's like a full-fledged factory that we used to run, which was shut down. So when you have to deal with the CEO of the entire institute, I mean, for him also it was a shock, because how do you make that transition? So I think the biggest challenge that we had was the mindset challenge. So first, I think in that way our leadership was very agile. And they very quickly, adapted to this situation, and also found out, what are the things that can be done to transit from the physical to digital format. And while doing this, we also spend a lot of time on interacting with the industry, because our key stakeholders were banks. So we had to interact with them, and even banks were shut down. So the first approach that we had while creating any system was the UI UX principle. That's a design thinking principle that we use: the user interface and the user experience. So we spend good amount of time in understanding what would a academic student do when they are being exposed to a digital platform, and how would a banker deal with a digital platform. And both have a very different challenges. So we first tried to have a small cohort where we had a discussion with them. Like if you were put through all these sessions in an online format, what are the challenges you would face? And the same we did with the bankers. And we came out with all these issues, as you said, people are not digital savvy, people don't know how to turn on Teams, what is Zoom, how do you download it, how do you make it work. So we made a very interesting format where we used infographics and, explained through cartoons and, animations on how do you use all these, applications. At the same time, your privacy aspect. So as I said, cultural aspect. So when we talk about here in UAE, we cannot enforce people to turn on their cameras. So if you don't want to. So we also had to sensitize people about these aspects. Also, most of these trainings were recorded. So you need to also have that sensitization about what are you talking and how you are interacting with the participants. So it was a huge learning journey. Like, I'll give you a very simple example. We had self-paced learning courses which we made. Now imagine if I put you in front of a 60-minute video which has a presentation as well as a teaching element. As you said, attention span. After maybe 2 minutes, I'm going to lose interest. So what we did was, after every major topic that is covered, maybe in 20 minutes, maximum 20 minutes, there is a question which will pop up in the video itself related to that important topic. And it is not like a word-based MCQ. It is more like a thinking-based question. So if you have understood, then only you will be able to answer. If you could not answer, the video gets replayed from the point where you left. So you can't cheat the system. You can't just leave it on and go and make coffee or do something else. So these were all small elements which we could bring in, which again, it was all after having discussion with the stakeholders. So for us, the biggest learning curve was having these sessions with the cohort and trying to understand from them. And then I think as we developed the systems, we improvised it better and better. And we also had to undergo massive training for our training staff as well. Because, in a physical classroom session, so I'll give you a very simple example. I had teachers who came to me and they said, I can't sit and teach. I have to stand and teach. So, I mean, I was thinking, how would it matter whether you sit or stand? But they're used to moving around, they're used to, using their hand, and they get a feedback from the audience, whether, they understand, they're interested or not, and based on that, they're changing their, teaching style. But in a digital format, it's like blank. So after 15, 20 minutes, you feel lost. So you also have to train these people. So we spend a lot of time in also bringing these training for the faculties as well as the trainers that we had. A lot of animation content itself changed for us. Animation was brought in, so you can use for presentation, like for example, there is, instead of using a PowerPoint, you have something like Prezi. So you can use Prezi to make a presentation and make it much more interesting and lively. So it was a huge learning curve for all stakeholders. And I think that close interaction with the stakeholders really helped us overcome most of these challenges.
Fabulous, presentation to Prezi and engaging people when you're used to looking into eyes and moving around, and now actually getting onto a scenario where you're talking to yourself, probably looking at the wall and your own PPT. I think there's a transition we all are discussing. At the same time, as I already mentioned, thanks to Elets for bringing loads of such best practitioners outside, and I'm sure you all in your own parlance must be connecting with lot of such LMS providers, platform providers. Now my last question, then I'll go to audience if Iqbal permits the time. Are we going with time? Yeah? Okay, great. So my last, and that will be a very quick one from all of you. You have plethora of now tools and technologies and platforms, and there are so many best practices and learning going around. Now probably it's other way around, all right? So you have so much choices. So what exactly we are doing, in your own experience, that how you are coming forward and making the right choice for your professors and students. And also I like the way, Dr. Rommel, you talked about branding. It's very important that my institution is the best kind of message should go, because the way of transitions, you talked about hybrid and now becoming normal. So I think many can be learned from you, that how do you really choose now these all method, the new pedagogy of learning for your students? If you can please highlight in one-liner, then we go to our audience.
I think now as institution, most are more or less clear that dual way of learning or blended learning is here to stay. So once you've more or less decided that, you have planned everything to suit that. So in our country, as per regulations, now we are allowed to give 20, 30, 40% credits through blended model, which was perhaps not allowed 2 years ago. So that brings it brings a legal sanctity to what you're doing. So that is a huge, huge, huge benefit. Obviously, there are some guidelines issued with that. So now students, faculties, everyone is clear that this credits also can be done through certain online models. Secondly, I believe in the private sector also, the tools and the LMSs that were existing have really changed in the last 2 to 3 years. So as a university or institutions, we are looking at 2 to 3 partners who are helping us course content providers who are helping us with various programs from across the world. So now you have to do your assessment that for each program, where what kind of, now exactly as you mentioned, there are more choices, so it's harder. So like you have an X program, which online modules, open source learning do you think are the best fit? So that is a harder choice now, because you have said 20 providers, hundreds of programs, but with our university, our students, these 4 or 5 programs we think are the best fit to go along with classroom teaching. So that mix, that understanding has to be done by the faculty university level. Secondly, training. It has a huge issue.
Thank God you didn't mention
Training
ChatGPT.
of faculties, they have to be. The whole mindset has to be changed, there's nothing else.
No, I love the way you express that, how you enabled.
It's just going on and on from COVID.
No. It's a journey rather.
There is no way, yeah.
Correct.
It takes time, but there's no way other training.
Thank you, Joutishman. But I am glad that you didn't mention usage of ChatGPT. So I'll come to that probably. So, Dr. Rommel.
Thank you. I think it's so important to emphasize on that adult learning pedagogy, because you expect your students to be prepared ahead of time, even before the pandemic, but it's even more tough, when you handle the class. You don't want to end up like talking to yourself in the process. But now, since it's a different ball game, many of us are doing it physically. We want to maintain the momentum by still having those tools in place. Like now we have increased probably up to 40% use of simulations. Like when you make management decisions, you want to make sure that students, even outside the classroom, they do deliberate, because again, that's part of our expectation, part of that adult learning pedagogy. It's so important that they do have some sort of openness with the flipped classroom that we currently have. One thing that I would probably share in terms of the best practices is that many of our Canadian partners, for example, in Northwest, in Edmonton, University in Edmonton, we have COIL classes. The COIL classes happen to be like this. Regardless of the time that we have here and there, of course, we need to take into account the common time due to the time element. The instructors and the students of the same class basically interact 30% of the time to work on a project. And whatever the project has been, we ascertain the best ones, the top ones, and we publish them. So I think it's a very good way to interact with what's going on overseas and what best practices they have been doing in terms of their real-life pragmatic projects, and how we come to capture all of those essential features of the project and then eventually publish them, because that's the challenge of the times. You have to basically maximize and optimize the use of these resources that were spent over a certain period of time, and the output of which we need to make sure that they are published. Yeah, thank you.
Excellent point. I think this is very encouraging that you are publishing their work. Yes, please.
In our case, choosing a platform, so I'll just give you a context about the philosophy that we created during this time. So, and this was both for the training division as well as the academic division. We called this, since I'm from finance, I like those jargons, so we called it AAA philosophy. So in finance, if you have a AAA bond, that means it's the best rated, so that's why we named it AAA. So what are those 3 A's? So we said acquire, apply, and assimilate. So when you acquire knowledge through any of these platforms, that's a content delivery that happens. Apply is where you check, whether they're able to use these skills. So you give them projects and other activity to see whether they have understood the concept. And assimilate is you create a case study where they're able to think and probably over a period of time make that decision. Now they're not memorizing, it's ingrained in them. So this was the philosophy that we used. In terms of, and this was seen in each platform and the system that we created. While choosing the vendor, we had a challenge because we were dealing with multiple stakeholders. Like I'll give you an example. We have banks like ADCB or ADIB or FAB. They do not support a Zoom platform. And so we can't create everything on a Zoom platform. But at the same time, in a Zoom platform, there's a problem that you can't monitor the activity. So we had to incorporate Teams and Microsoft Office as an embedded tool so that everything can be tracked. At the same time, we also had to incorporate multiple platforms like Zoom and others to bring that flexibility, because you can't dictate terms to your clients, right? You can't tell them, if you don't use this, I won't give you training. So we had to adapt to all these changes. So it was a challenging time, but I think our philosophy was ingrained in anything that we choose, the AAA philosophy that we created. Yeah.
Thank you so much, right from telling us the new method, new pedagogy, and the way we have turned around the whole system. And thanks to you for mentioning this, Zoom platform. We all have witnessed how Microsoft Teams and Zoom has undergone change because the demand got created. I mean, those breakaway rooms, the whiteboards, all this facilitation had happened on such platform to enable the whole method of teaching. I think really a lot of evolution has happened. So now I have some attention towards the audience. You have any question? Do we have mic runner? So we have some questions from our lovely audience. Yeah, there's mic.
Yeah, hi, good morning to all. My simple question is that very soon we are going to witness the robots going to take place in the higher education system. The robots will apply the AI, ChatGPT, all the digital platforms. Then how to overcome this, the role of robots in higher education system? So what is your comment on that one? Because I'm a science faculty, I know that. So the AI, ChatGPT, like the different digital platforms are there. Then the higher education universities also tomorrow, they will adopt the complete digitalization of the education system. So they will take the robots will play as educators for tomorrow world, to how to overcome this one. Because see, education plays a crucial role in the community. So what is your comment on that one?
It's a very interesting question. I think in terms of, so there are two things that you can do. One is if you give them assignments, I think they will still use these tools. So I don't know if you have read, I think last week itself in Australia, the board exams, they have gone back to paper-based format. And so that is one way of responding to it. Second is, I think there are some tools that are available, like if you have Turnitin, which is a plagiarism software, they also have now embedded a way by which they could catch ChatGPT-based solutions if they are there in submissions or assignments that are there. The second, I think, in yesterday's session, there was a gentleman who was dean of, I think, Mr. Hani. He was from the Dubai Innovation School. So I think he pointed this correctly. What we are training these people for, whatever skill you're training them for, 5 years from now, it's going to change. So the only thing that you can train them on is, on creativity, on critical thinking ability, and the agile mindset, that is learn, unlearn, and relearn. So if these three things are incorporated in them, I think, there shouldn't be any challenge for them to go forward and adapt to any new situation. So if you still give them, specific question-oriented assignments or question-oriented projects, the ChatGPT would actually, kill all this. And we in fact had a activity which we did for our trainers. We said, like we say, you should write a case study. We actually had a session where we made ChatGPT write a role play for us to teach ethics, ChatGPT write a case study to teach financial fraud, and it could actually give us examples and all that. So it is not only for the students, the challenge is also going to be for the faculty, because now what you are supposed to do is also or could also be done by the ChatGPT. So maybe, I don't know, you may have robo teachers like you have robo advisors. So that is also something which you need to, we need to up the game, not only just teach, but yeah, we also need to up our game.
If I may add, I teach analytics to students, and my entire, method, I not only teach analytics, advanced metrics in analytics, okay? And I openly work with them, and they are all my Discord friends. All right, when I talked about would you like to be my Discord friend, they're like, really, ma'am, you use that? So sometimes the youngsters think that professors don't know, they are not as agile as them, they don't use such, innovative platform. First of all, making them comfortable there. Secondly, my entire class is absolutely practice-based. So as already, Dr. Suyash talked about that, when we are involving them in the new method, new process, and they're enjoying the whole learning, that what is good about it or is what, really, really not exciting, I think they come forward and, they use their HI, human intelligence. So I was tempted to share, that how sometimes it can be an enabling, factor as well. I hope you got your response. If you want anyone to comment, or you're fine. Yeah. Any other question we have from the audience? Else, Iqbal is already telling Runa, your time is over. So, but we can take one more question if you have. All right, so fine, thank you once again. A big thanks and huge round of applause to Elets, Dr. Ravi and his team, and all of you who have come forward and listened to our eminent speakers. Thank you, Joutishman, thank you, Rommel, thank you, Suyash, for your lovely thoughts sharing. There are loads of learning I'm taking away, and I'm sure we all have. So yes, let's not be frugal. Let's all clap for each other for being together right in the morning. Thank you so much for your presence.